Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Let's get straight into this new letter. This one comes from Kelly, and we're going to hear what Kelly has to say. She starts, I came out 3 years ago, as in out of the closet, as part of the LGBTQA plus experience, and moved recently to a small town. It's been challenging to date and meet people locally. At the beginning of last year, I had a relationship with a woman who had just ended a 2-year relationship before we started seeing each other. The whole experience has left me wondering what was true. I just want to take a moment here to say I think a lot of us probably know where this is all going, but let's get into it. Our connection began about 4 months before her breakup. At first, I thought she wanted to build a friendship since I was new to the community and eager to meet new people. We started spending time together and hanging out with friends. A month before her breakup, she pressed to spend more time with me. Later in the relationship, she actually admitted she had intended to initiate something romantically with me from the start. In hindsight, it was a red flag. A week after her breakup, she confessed her feelings for me. Although it felt very soon, I liked her and enjoyed spending time with her. We shared many interests and had deep conversations, and she seemed genuinely interested in me. She said she'd never felt such an emotional connection and that I made her feel seen and valued. We agreed to take it slow and to keep hanging out, though she asked me not to tell anyone about our relationship, to be sensitive to her ex's feelings. We'll be returning to that point. As we spent more time together, she opened up about her past, including a past long-term relationship where she had been cheated on. She expressed how deeply hurt she was, and she said she treated her ex resentfully and poorly when she took her back. I shared my past, including an abusive upbringing and neglect. I've been in therapy for 2 years and learned about my triggers and trauma responses. She talked about her current ex relationships, describing it as having no connection and mentioning her ex had to conform to her volatile moods. Another red flag. Still, I wanted to see the best in her and appreciated her vulnerability. We'll be returning to that point too. The initial months of our relationship were filled with intense affection and deep conversations. She constantly told me how lucky she felt to have met me and that she never felt such a connection before an overwhelming amount. I reciprocated, but I voiced my doubts and said, I don't want to be a rebound or just a distraction from her feelings about coming out of a relationship that didn't work out. I wanted her to take time to figure out her feelings. She agreed, saying it would be for the best. This was hard, as I leaned towards anxious attachment and didn't want to lose a good thing, but knew it was the best way to protect myself. I want to start out here by saying, Kelly, your self-awareness is gold, and I love a lot of the things that you're saying. And the way you're communicating about the need to take things slowly. And I can imagine it would have been easier said than done. Only after a few days, she said she wanted to be with me and continued to flatter me with, "You're the one" statements. But at the same time, insisted we keep a low profile. As time passed, she began comparing me to her ex, praising me against her ex's perceived flaws. Initially, these comparisons made me feel validated and different. I wondered why she made these comparisons and if she was testing my reaction. One day, she implied that our relationship couldn't go further and suggested it was a bit of fun. This comment left me anxious. The next day, I confronted her, stating that I wanted a relationship and couldn't stay if that's all she thought it was. Good on you. She insisted I had misheard and had no reason to be upset and reaffirmed her commitment. I'm just going to say now, I'm shaking my head thinking that's dreadful because I feel like she probably did make that comment initially out of a place of fear of intimacy and then was trying to play it off as if it wasn't a big deal, which in a way is a form of gaslighting, so not okay. She said she would be devastated and broken if I left her, and said she was excited about future plans and even suggested we go away together. Though I knew what I had heard, I apologized for mishearing and overreacting. Okay. To anyone listening to this, you probably have heard a similar story like this before, and I can tell you, you didn't mishear and you weren't overreacting. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, going between affection and withdrawal. I was away with friends one weekend. She called, upset, and saying she was overwhelmed and couldn't commit to a relationship. I suggested we cancel going away to relieve the pressure. When I arrived home, we talked, and she told me she could see a future and a feeling of love was deepening. I reciprocated. I cared for her and was empathetic about her going through a hard time. I wanted to accept her for everything she was, although her hot and cold behavior had left me on edge. Yeah, I can imagine. Whilst away, she became less affectionate, dismissive of any conversation, and criticized me for small things, making me feel self-conscious. It was behavior I'd never seen in her before. I began to feel like I couldn't do anything correctly. Although there were good times, I sensed a shift. After a few days of returning, she broke up with me, claiming it had become too serious and she wasn't in the place for a relationship. And initially, I took on a lot of self-blame. Despite being heartbroken, I accepted it. She said she was still incredibly attracted to me and still wanted to talk daily. No, but I decided to cut contact to help me healing. Yeah, good on you. Weeks later, through a mutual acquaintance, I'd learned she'd gone to her ex before she broke up with me, professing her love for her. I was devastated when I heard this. The betrayal made me feel intense shame, rejection, embarrassment, and self-doubt. It was a massive blow on top of being broken up, which greatly impacted my mental well-being. I remain in a state of no contact. Before I go on to talk about the questions that Kelly has for me, I just want to state I am so proud of you, Kelly, for how you've maintained no contact and also the way you communicated throughout this experience. Because that time in therapy and also your awareness of your attachment style has not gone to waste. I am so sorry to you for what you have been through, because it really does sound to me like this girl you've been interacting with truly has had tremendous big feelings for you. And I think it's awful. You're in an experience where you have just come out of the closet and you're being more open. You're trying something new. You're connecting with someone who's obviously just come out of from the sounds of it, a very loveless relationship. They're professing how you've given them something that they've never had before. And then they go on to not only give you some very nasty warning signs that things weren't okay, they acted like they weren't really an issue. Subsequently, break up with you after telling you how everything was at the best it could possibly be when you're both reciprocating your love for one another, and then end it. And then, act like you can still be friends with one another because she doesn't want anything quote unquote too serious. You decline. Good on you for doing that again, by the way. And then she goes back to her ex, whom she was stating was not as good as you. But now, through this mutual friend, You hear that she's now saying, oh, I love you, I've missed you to her ex, who she was formerly dragging. And you also mentioned you didn't want to be a rebound. Terrible. I will share my attachment stuff in just a hot second, but I just wanted to say I really don't care about the attachment stuff at this particular moment. I will because I want to talk about it, but I wanted to take this moment just to say this behavior is absolutely fucked. It's not okay. It's emotionally abusive. It's so not okay to do that to someone. You can't just be throwing out all this emotional affection for someone, stating things like, you're better than my ex, and then going back to your ex like that. It's not okay. I mean, based on what I'm reading here, there's no basis for her to think that returning to her ex would necessarily be better than staying with you. There doesn't seem to be any rational thought in this whatsoever. It was just a case of, this was getting too serious. I can't deal with it. Not okay. I've unfortunately heard many of these stories, and we're going to talk more about this in just a hot second. Your questions. In terms of betrayal, when she knows from her own experience it hurts and is devastating, why does she inflict this on her ex and me? And how aware is she of this? Okay, great question. In my experience, a lot of them are aware of the shame and guilt of what they've done, but they don't want to deal with it. A lot of these people, and I am specifically talking about people with a severe avoidant attachment style, I think part of them does know how they've behaved and how they've really hurt other people. And I think they know they have a problem with intimacy. But you got to remember too, particularly for people who are leaning more fearful avoidant, dismissive leaning fearful avoidance, they also have a nasty, nasty wound of being defective and feeling like a bad person. So how does this translate? They do not want to feel shame. Shame is absolute kryptonite for someone with a severe avoidant attachment style. They hold on to a lot of toxic shame. So for them, even if on one hand they know that they've potentially hurt you, the easier thing for them to do is to compartmentalize, move forward, and just take all that love and affection that she had for you and throw it onto the ex that she was bitching about and dragging because it's more comfortable and easy. So, terrible behavior. With the hot and cold cycles, I often wonder if this was a way to gauge my commitment or compliance to her. On reflection, I feel it's manipulative. Okay, I'm going to say now, before I said I was going to hold off on the attachment stuff because I wanted to get to it eventually, I'm just going to jump straight in. You are likely dealing with a dismissive leaning, fearful avoidant. You really nailed it there in that question because it's definitely that thing that a lot of fearful avoidance do where they test your commitment because that comes from the anxious attachment side. But when she was earlier, she was talking about how she was unsure if this could be anything serious and that this was just too fun for her. And you picked up on that and were like, what the fuck are you saying? That was more of her avoidance side, peeking out, probably trying to, self-sabotage a little bit in because she was scared of that growing intimacy. So yes, I agree. It is manipulative. It's emotionally manipulative. But one thing I want to throw in here too and say is I don't think she was doing this with intention or malice. I don't think she was doing this because she was someone who was going out there with an agenda to, fuck you and her ex over. I genuinely think she was coming from a very immature place. Does it mean that's an excuse? Hell no. It's what I call unintentional abuse. And even if it's unintentional, doesn't lessen the impact, which in most cases is pretty damn devastating because you would never assume that someone who's been so into you would probably, cut you up in this particular way. You also go on to say, I sense that she may have been projecting her unresolved issues onto me. Absolutely. Was this to maintain control and avoid vulnerability? Yeah, usually there's a lot of projection that avoidance will do. And I think with this particular girl that you were engaging with, I think that she was likely projecting a lot of, her own shame about herself, her needs onto you. It's very much a dismissive, leaning, fearful, avoidant thing to do where they don't like the fact that they have needs, so they might be throwing it onto you. I didn't sense any of that specifically. The need, so like the self-hatred of having needs on you in this particular example. I'm just citing that as like what can happen. But usually in my experience, there's a lot of, I will say there is a lot of, at times, very rude behavior from these individuals where they'll say things like, you're so needy. I find it hard to to communicate with you. You're overbearing. You're just so confusing. And so that's the kind of language that you'd get as far as projection goes in these kind of dynamics. I had the sense I was used and she was aware of what she was doing. Was she lining me up for the breakup with her ex just to fill a void? Yes. Yes. And that's why she also went back to her ex. Again, I want to say I don't think this was done with like a lot of thought. I think this is because one of the big things a lot of dismissive leaning, fearful avoidance have is a humongous fear of abandonment that also looks like separation anxiety. You may find that many of these people really struggle being alone with themselves. They often really struggle, being able to sit comfortably on their own without another person being with them. So when you are sharing this to me, I think just like what she was doing with her ex, I think that she jumped into the situation with her ex because, and also she went back to her ex because she probably couldn't handle the intense feelings, the shame, the guilt, and also the loneliness when you went no contact. And that was someone who probably just took her back in. And rather than have the boundaries to be like, no, she went back into that relationship, which from the sounds of it was quite emotionally absent. But a lot of these individuals are subconsciously drawn to trying to make the impossible possible, meaning that a lot of them will try and win over a abuser's approval. They'll try and, beat a dead horse to get love when it's never going to happen because it's not a real relationship. There's no chance to actually make it happen. With you, it sounds like it was real and it freaked her out. So yeah, I think this was a way of her managing her fear of abandonment. After saying that she had toxic behavior, after saying that she had toxic behavior with her ex, why is it that she wanted her back? Because this is her way, like I was saying earlier, of feeling safe. Even though on one hand, a lot of these individuals know that their comfort zone, their unhealthy food insofar as dating is concerned, is not good for them. It is much more comfortable for their nervous system than dating someone like you. Also, it makes them feel good in a way too. They get to help the person who's going through so many difficult experiences. She mentioned earlier in this letter too, how she was, sorry, you mentioned earlier in this letter that, she had tried maintaining contact with her ex because she felt bad about, letting her down. This is a thing that a lot of these individuals have is, big people pleasing issues, and they don't know how to like cut contact and just let things be. They don't also know how to have proper boundaries. And I think a lot of this too is that fear of letting go. Even though she may have been readily adamant to end the relationship with you, she wasn't creating closure with you either. She still tried to have her cake and eat it too. So even if she knew that she had all this toxic behavior with her ex, she may have also been aware that she thought, oh, well, maybe it's my ex that brought this out of me. Maybe she didn't actually want to look too deeply at her own toxic behavior because it was too scary. Anyone can have awareness over the fact that they behave badly. And I also don't want to blame you too for when she disclosed that you were saying like, oh, this is a red flag. Yes, it is a red flag. But also to be fair to you and to a lot of people who've probably been in a situation like this, many people can be aware of their toxic behaviors and it can feel like a bit of a relief to be like, oh, they're aware, therefore they may do something differently. And I want to tell you that that belief, whilst I hear where you're coming from, may not necessarily translate to the person is taking actionable steps on their toxic behavior. In fact, it may just be something that, manifests later down the line as well too. You've also concluded here my learning points. I need to trust my intuition, not to overlook red flags, and be cautious about attaching too quickly. I completely agree with you. Especially given my history of seeking love and validation, I understand that elements of this relationship massively play into my past triggers. Lastly, given it has been so hard to meet people, date, and find a relationship, I accepted her behavior in a desperation to make it work. Fair enough. Listen, when you are someone who's part of a community, and I don't just mean the LGBTQA plus community, I'm talking like part of a population here. If you're in a remote town, you're a part of a job which doesn't have a lot of people to it. You may find that scarcity thinking enters the room, meaning that you end up settling and also feeling lonely. And I got to tell you, loneliness is a huge motivator for people to stay in unhealthy relationships. I will tell you now that one of the worst things people can do is date when they're lonely, isolated, don't know anyone, don't have an established, support network. And I know it's easier said than done, but you going out there dating and trying to make connections with people when you don't have that set up means we often put up with less because we feel like there's nothing else out there. So just be very mindful of that. But I think, Kelly, you're doing a great job. Now, I want to return to the attachment conversation because I barely even got into that because I was answering your questions. All right, so let's just talk about this. You mentioned something that I said I was going to return to that, a month before her breakup with her ex, she pressed to spend more time with you. Later, when you were in a relationship, she had actually admitted that she'd intended to initiate something romantically with me from the start. That again speaks to the fact that she was someone who was probably trying to feel safety and comfort by moving with you. And also, it sounds like her relationship with her ex was emotionally desolate. And even though she's saying now, oh, I've got all this love for this ex of mine, I suspect there's a bit of phantom ex nostalgia coming up for her. I also suspect too she's taking a lot of that love that she had with you and throwing it onto her, taking all that joy and that euphoria to get over you to make her feel like she can make it work with her ex. Not okay. And I also said that I wanted to return to another point that you mentioned about she talked about her current ex relationship, describing it as having no connection and mentioning her ex had to conform to volatile moods, another red flag. Still, I wanted to see the best in her and appreciate her vulnerability. I want to start with what she said, and then I want to turn and talk to you, Kelly. When she's talking about how she had no connection and and then she had to make her ex conform to her volatile moods, that is that is really reflecting how self-aware she is of her own crap. And the fact that she didn't actually try and make any differences in her behavior is a gigantic red flag. Because yes, she may be self-aware. And it's something that I often say to people too is a lot of these avoidant attachers, frankly, like almost all the ones that I do know that they behave in ways that are not great. And yet it sort of becomes cumulative karma because they keep trying to find ways to avoid the fact that they've done something wrong. And so they keep moving forward, acting as if everything's fine because they don't want to, deal with the elephant in the room, which is they're contributing to the shit. This links into something I'll talk about in a minute. But what I did want to go and talk about with you is how you wanted to see the good in her. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I have heard that from clients, and I really get that. A lot of you people are optimists. You're people who have a lot of empathy, love, and you may lean in the direction of fawning, where you're trying to make, it work with people who are emotionally unavailable. And you have a tendency to sometimes take that wonderful optimism and apply it to people where there is no opportunity for optimism, in the sense that some people are just never, ever going to escape their trauma and they're going to behave like this. I love the fact that you've actually tried this, but I think one of the things that I would say to you, just as a point of accountability, is please learn, and this is something I'm still practicing and learning, and it's something I've had to do, discern where that optimism can be applied, because there are absolutely lots of people out there who are capable of change, likely yourself included. But it's part of our journey to find more of those people than the people who dwell in their own toxicity and make more shit for themselves without ever learning to clean it up. One thing I wanted to turn to is there were two things that came out for me. You, on one hand, we're receiving all these intense love bombing expressions like "you're the one," whilst also having the opposite of when, she was suggesting the relationship couldn't go any further. It was just a bit of fun. That is a great example of intermittent reinforcement and cognitive dissonance. You're getting all these intense bursts, but then cut into pieces with it was just a bit of fun. We can't take it serious. That would understandably cause a lot of confusion in people. She was gaslighting you by saying you're mishearing and overreacting. Not okay. But this again is a way of her avoiding any accountability of her side of the street. And I find it interesting how she increasingly became quite erratic between affection and withdrawal. To me, this really illustrates how she was probably really oscillating between those intense fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy. And I think the fear of intimacy ultimately overwhelmed her, but she didn't want to lose you out of fear of abandonment. And so she wanted to try and maintain the friendship or just keep you in her life at a distance without actually cutting it effectively. This is all on her terms. This is like absolute control. So it's not okay. In any case, I want to take a step back here and say this story is one I've heard of many times over, and it's a really good example of someone who has that, like I said, that dismissive leaning, fearful avoidance style. Not every fearful avoidant acts this way, and this one's quite severe. But also, can I just say, this person's behavior, very common to what I've heard in a lot of other people as well too. And, it sounds to me like her comfort zone, what she enjoys, this is the person who you dated, I'm talking about. Her comfort zone is dating people who are emotionally dead, people who, where she's allowed to enact this toxic moodiness. And though she may feel some degree of comfort being in a relationship like that, she's both getting, I guess a sense of stability in the instability, in that her nervous system isn't going to freak out over being intimate with someone. But in saying that, she's also likely starving herself of true connection. And this is the curse that a lot of people like this have, is when you have a fear of intimacy, you are going to be chronically lonely. And I mean like mega, 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 mega lonely, because loneliness outside of, not having people around you is only cured when we have an emotional connection with ourselves and can also emotionally connect and relate to people around us. I would hate to think what rock bottom's coming for her if she doesn't work on this. And in a way, I pity what she's got to go through. I know she probably doesn't want someone like me giving her pity, but to you, I am really sorry that you've gone through this, because this is dreadful and you didn't deserve to go through this. In any case, Kelly, I just want to say, I think you handled yourself exceptionally well given the circumstances of what you've been through. It sounds like it was an absolute, emotional whiplash journey, but I'm so proud of you for being very decisive to go no contact in spite of the geographical difficulties of your situation, your circumstances, and all that. So good on you for how you navigated this. And again, I'm sorry to you for going through such an awful experience with this. Now, as I'm just rounding out here, to anyone who found this letter reading particularly helpful, you are very welcome to submit a letter to me when availability opens next month. I often find that for a lot of people, they do find that hearing these letters being read out does offer them a lot of comfort and relatability. So I hope that off the back of hearing a lot of this stuff today, this has been of some degree of comfort and validation and reassurance to you. Thank you very much for listening to this today, and I'll be back for the next letter reading.